Going to the fairs, I think, is an exceptional way to learn about collecting and about the history of photography, because you can see the very beginnings of the history of photography all the way through to things that were made months ago. You get everything in one room where you can walk around and really discover what has happened and what's happening now. And I think the biggest part of that is finding something that you like and not being intimidated to ask about it. And I think all the dealers that are working, all the gallerists, they want you to come in and talk to them.
That was Andrew Rusick, who has grown up collecting photography, talking about the value of going to art fairs for engaging with your curiosity about both the history of the medium and starting your own collection, in the final episode of my 7-part collaborative series with AIPAD, in the lead up to the 2025 edition of the Photography Show, the oldest and longest running art fair for photography, which takes place from the 23rd until the 27th of April at the Park Avenue Armory in New York City. My guests today are Sophie Wright and Andrew Rusick. Sophie Wright is the Executive Director at Fotografiska New York, a position held since April 2022. Prior to this, she served as Global Cultural Director at Magnum Photos from October 2003 until October 2020. Andrew Rusick is the Director of Scheinbaum and Rusick Limited, a gallery specialising in 20th century and contemporary photography. She entered the field in 2000 when she became the Assistant in the Conservation Department at the George Eastman House Museum of Photography. In 2005, she joined the Photographs Department at Sotheby's New York as a specialist/senior cataloguer, working on significant sales such as important photographs from the Metropolitan Museum of Art and photographs from the private collection of Margaret M. Weston. We begin by briefly introducing the On Collecting partnership between Fotografiska and AIPAD, which sets the stage for our discussion about getting started with collecting photography. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome to the program. You're listening to Subtext Discourse Art World podcast, highlighting unique perspectives on contemporary art and photography. I'm your host, Michael Dooney. Now, without further ado, I hope you'll enjoy our conversation. Seeing as you've both come from quite different ends of the kind of photography spectrum, I thought maybe we can start by comparing and contrasting somebody that's come from probably the most known photo agency in the world, Magnum, and somebody that deals with vintage photography from the 20th century.
Well, I don't think we're so far apart in that Magnum also has a very prestigious archive of the 20th century. And, you know, in my time there as Global Cultural Director, I was overseeing print sales and actually oversaw quite a lot of acquisitions by major museums globally of work that was produced and prints that were produced in the mid-20th century. So although I was working with contemporary practitioners and putting that in conversation with the historical work whenever I could, you know, I was actually operating in both areas. Certainly not with perhaps the same kind of training as Andra. I went into Magnum aged 29, but prior to that, I was also in my 20s. I worked for the guy that founded Photo London's fair, Daniel Newberg, and had kind of worked in a number of small businesses where photography was used in lots of different ways. So I would say I'm a generalist, but obviously very specifically working with documentary photography for a very long time and a particular pool of photographers in that space. And then just to say with the Fotografiska, obviously is the Contemporary Museum of Photography, Art and Culture. I'm the outgoing New York Executive Director, just to be clear about that role, but I'm speaking on behalf of Global in the context of our Collecting for Everyone program with AIPAD.
Okay.
But Fotografiska is more known for its contemporary exhibitions, although it does do contemporary iterations and representations of historical work. And we just had a very successful Vivian Meyer last summer. We are mostly known for showing the work of contemporary photographers.
And as for me, this is Andra here. I actually think that Magnum and what I do in the gallery world are kind of interwoven, because those photographers are such a vital part of the history of photography and 20th century photography. So I don't feel like we're completely too far apart as well, because Magnum is kind of a monumental group of people that have really contributed to the art world and to the photography world. But as for me, what I do now is, you know, I really work hard to help collectors learn about photography, learn about what their interests are, and build collections with people who really want to learn more about photography and focus on it. So buying what they love, but also education is kind of at the core of what we're doing as well. But I do think that there's this world of photography is quite small. And so everything is kind of woven together in some way or another, which is really nice to me. So that's from my perspective. I work as a gallerist now. I'm in New Mexico, so I'm not in New York. I don't have a big gallery out there. I'm a private dealer. And I really work to kind of put the best photograph that someone's looking for in their hands.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you have a kind of a focus on education and educating collectors. How did the partnership between AIPAD Talks and Fotografiska come about?
I mean, I was talking to Andrew about this earlier. I mean, from my perspective, I came into New York in the role in April 2022. Fotografiska was relatively unusual in the New York market because we were a for-profit. And for me, noting that our membership, at our height, we had 2,400 members, were called collectors and patrons. It was really important that there was a responsibility, frankly, for this very culturally curious audience that we had to educate them further into what the art market was. And I saw that our position, not in the non-profit space, meant that we could provide a platform and a resource as part of our programming for educating our audience into the art market. When I started, we weren't working with AIPAD, we were working with Freeze, and it was very obvious to me that we needed to sort that out and support AIPAD. I mean, Andrew talks about the ecosystem being quite small, and I think it's a mutually collaborative, beneficial kind of ecosystem. And so we started working with AIPAD when I joined, and then we had a talk from the head of photography at Philips, a couple of talks actually about collecting photography. It kind of became very clear that, and I should say that's Vanessa Hallett. It became very clear that our audience also responded very well to hearing from collectors, because I think each collector comes at collecting from a very different perspective, and they've got very different personalities and have very individualistic perspectives on what they're interested in. And I think that's fascinating. And it's a study in personality as well as in the motivations for why and what they collect. And then, Lydia and I talked about how, obviously she's doing a fantastic job at AIPAD. Her role is to develop and grow the audience there. So it seemed like an obvious thing for us to join forces on this Collecting for Everyone talks program and work with our different audiences and hopefully convert and encourage some new collectors in the mix.
Yeah, AIPAD, I don't know if we've officially cleared up what AIPAD is, but AIPAD is the Association of International Photography Art Dealers. And we are a membership association, and we have about 90 or so members, and they're all photo-based galleries. And the biggest thing that we do is we put on the photography show, which is going to be held in April 23rd. I think we open, and throughout that week at the Park Avenue Armory in New York. And Lydia is our executive director, who has been working with Fotografiska and also been incredible for AIPAD. I'll just say that. And our goal really is to bring in new collectors and bring in people who have an interest in photography, but who haven't quite been able to explore that interest yet. So our partnership with Fotografiska is kind of this wonderful blending of groups and organizations to introduce people to different ways of collecting photography, which I think is the best thing that we could do. So it's been a wonderful partnership. I know AIPAD is thrilled about it. Lydia is thrilled about it. And so that's kind of where AIPAD is. And, we're constantly trying to figure out ways to introduce people to photography. And it doesn't have to be contemporary photography. It's just introducing people to photography and giving them a pathway to find what they love.
Yeah. For introducing AIPAD, we will probably cover it in every episode.
Yeah,
because I'm not.
I'm
so
sure.
For people that have listened to the previous episodes, apologies. For people listening to this first episode, now you know what AIPAD is. I've watched some of the videos in the series, and how many are there to be released, and what kind of topics are you covering?
I think there's 6 in total. We've got our last one on the 16th of April. And we've really tried to be very broad in the topics that we've covered. So the last one we did actually a couple of weeks back was on photographic ephemera, which was really good fun.
Oh, cool.
we wanted to, we've done emerging photographers, we've done multimedia practitioners, we've done, photographic ephemera. We're trying to cover the bases and in each case really bring in, and we've done photo books, which was the first one that we started with. Really, because there's lots of ways of collecting photography. There's no one prescriptive route into it. And some people sort of land in an area and get really excited by it. I mean, I love the ephemera conversation with Daniel Oliver Gallery and Patrick Montgomery. And that was really, he's a collector who's really built archives, because it shows, we talk in photography about the reproducibility of photography sometimes being a bit of a challenge when it comes to talking to new collectors. But actually with photographic ephemera, it's the very reproducibility of the medium that makes it so interesting and diverse, in terms of the sort of the areas of collecting from ephemeral material, be they, pamphlets or posters or postcards or even, frankly, cups or anything with photography on it. So it's a really fun area that actually some very serious collectors and photographers, in fact, have kind of really got into. And again, affordable. I think everyone's got a few postcards in their houses. So I think that's the point, is just making it accessible and for people to understand, the various routes through to collecting.
Yeah. So if we're having this episode as a kind of everything you wanted to know about collecting photography, but you were afraid to ask, and we're taking it from the point of view of somebody that's maybe only bought a few prints, or they haven't bought a print yet, but they're very curious to do it. Beyond the image itself, what do you think are maybe some key points that they should probably consider as a first timer that's buying a photograph?
I think that one thing that I like to tell people is that, we live in an extremely visual world. So we can see pictures all the time. But when you come to collecting, you're not just buying a picture, you're buying an object. And I want people to start looking at photographs, not as just an image. Every photograph, it's a reproductive medium. So you can make many, but there aren't always many out there. And each one is still an individual piece for collecting. And you look at, the paper, the mounting, how the photographer has printed the photograph or how they've had it printed for them, and the tonalities. And so there's all these little nuances involved in collecting. And for me, the first thing to tell people is that you're not just collecting an image, you're collecting a photograph. And to me, it's very different, than saying, oh, well, I could print it off the internet. And it's not like that. There's so much more to it. And actually having a photograph in your home in person with you, it has a very different feel than looking at it on the screen, because there's so much to it as an object as well as just an image. That's one of the things that I always like to start talking to people about.
Yeah, Sophie, I think you mentioned editions. Maybe we can talk, what is an edition? What's an artist proof? What does that mean when I'm looking at a photograph that I want to buy?
I mean, I want to just add to what Andrew said as well, because I think, what turns someone that buys photographs into a collector, I think is an interesting question as well. And it's not just about the mechanics, it's about the compulsion and the sort of personal engagement that you have with a particular image or photographic object, and I think that's the fascinating thing that I've been really enjoying unpacking in terms of the conversations we've been having around collecting. It's about telling a story. And I think that's really important too. It's a personal engagement, but each object that you bring together becomes a narrative for you as a collector. And, I obviously working at somewhere like Magnum, where the foundation of the agency was in an editorial context, came up against the question of editions quite frequently, because some of the biggest names within the agency started obviously, in the mid 20th century, and were not thinking about the art market when they were photographing and printing. A lot of the works were produced for dissemination of their images. So I think you have to think about the author, the quality of the print, the provenance of the print. I mean, I absolutely loved some of the old press prints that we had in our archive. That was really our primary vintage material, really, that we sold at Magnum. And, they are all individualized through the stamps and the kind of the back of the print. And some of them are a bit knackered. And I sort of like that too, which is quite unusual, and particularly in this sort of very high end of the market. Collectors tend to go for the really pristine prints if they can. But I kind of like the objectiness and the sort of historical sort of source aspect of those prints being like that. So when it comes to editioning now, I mean, I think there's definitely a move towards that. Obviously, that came from the art print market. It was sort of brought into the photography space. And I think it is a kind of contract with the market. I think there's definitely a move to reduce the size of editions now within the contemporary space. It's a way to, I guess, drive value more quickly around images. And there's also obviously photography has expanded as a field into, collage and various other areas, even within the Magnum photographers. Some of them have experimented quite a lot with, unique prints and things like that. So it depends on what you're comfortable with, I think, as a collector. But I think there is also a real role for galleries and experts like Andra in that space to kind of give you the assurance of why a print is a certain price. And even if it isn't like an edition of one, the value should be, is reflected for a various number of reasons. The image itself, the content, the type of print, the artist, all of those different things play into the value.
Yeah, and I'll just go back into editions for a minute too, because there's this thought, because editions are so big now in the contemporary world. Most people are doing editions, most photographers. But when it comes to earlier work and kind of earlier 20th century work and things like that, and examples are just these early artists, they weren't editioning. They were actively working. They were taking a photograph, printing a couple prints. If someone called them, they would make them a print. And then they were going on and continuing and making more work and taking more photographs and making more prints. But there was also not a huge market at the time that they were working. So they weren't producing or editioning to meet the needs of that market because it wasn't there. So when it comes to earlier prints, and you can look at some, examples of, like, I'll say Edward Weston. He did try editioning, but it didn't work out too well. But, these people were busy in their art. And although they didn't edition, there might not be that many out there. And so the one thing that people have to understand is, like, this idea of editioning didn't really pick up as much until the art market kind of picked up, or the photo market specifically. So if you're coming in and saying, well, why isn't this edition? Well, there's a reason, because this artist was very busy working and they made so few, and then they went on to the next few, and then they kept going. And now I think, editioning is much more prevalent with contemporary photography. I know there are a few that do not, but they also tier out their pricing based on what they're making. But I think in terms of earlier vintage prints, I get this question all the time, and I have to explain that there wasn't really a space for them to be making large editions or even small editions all the time. It was kind of on demand that they were making these works. So it's a different space. And I think it's another thing that people have to understand, is that every artist is unique in the way that they present their work. And the best way to understand what they were doing and how many they were printing is by talking to someone who knows about that artist.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like listening to you both now, it's also the divide between, let's say, contemporary in terms of the market, so from the 70s onwards, and maybe pre-contemporary, so like early vintage photography, up until the point when the market did dictate, well, it was contemporary artists using photography that were editioning their works that pushed it forward because that's what the market demanded. But if somebody is buying contemporary photography or work from emerging artists or artists that are active today, when we talk about contemporary, we mean people that are active now, they're already going to be editioning their works. It's only historical vintage pieces. And in that case, it's the provenance really that's important, not the edition number. That if, I don't know, whatever significant person owned this picture, or if it went from the known photographer to an editor's desk to somewhere else, and then it's been through how many different hands, like it's not necessarily the photograph, but it's, again, it comes back to the object itself that holds the value, not the picture.
I think it's a combination, because I do think the picture does hold value. And I think, if you're looking at a picture by a photographer who, was printing earlier on and then revisited their work and printed it again, you're still going to have that image there that people are looking for or someone just falls in love with. But then you're going to start to differentiate between, oh, this print was made earlier on, this has this provenance versus this print being made later on. And it's still beautiful, it's still lovely, it's still collectible, but that might kind of start to change the price point. But I don't think that takes away from it being a great object, even if it's done later.
And also, I think, we always hate this overused word icon, but the images that were the most famous and well-known ones from Magnum's stable were the ones that were the most reproduced, in the press, in exhibitions, in books, and that actually is what drives the value of those images, because they've become part of the photographic kind of canon, I guess. And so it's actually, it's the opposite. It's the fact that they have been out in the world and they have been seen by lots of people in lots of different contexts, that they become these kind of, really resonant images. Obviously, they've got to that point because there's something magic about them in the first place. But nevertheless, that actually adds value to that print.
Do you think then new collectors or people that are interested in collecting photography should still be concerned about what if they make another one?
I think it's all about context. And I think, this is where the role of the gallery or the expert is really important. I mean, I'm not saying that you can't navigate the space yourself. And I think a lot of people come to collecting through lots of different means. There's a lot of collectible kind of platforms that you can sort of start getting things for like $1,000 here or there. And, even they have a lot of information around why images are a certain price, and they often limit by time, And in fact, Magnum itself had the Magnum Square print sale, which I think is still ongoing, which was a wonderful access point, $150 little print. They reproduced as many as, people were interested in them over a 5-day period. So a flash sale, limited by time, not by edition. A wonderful way to be able to get a signed Bruce Davidson or Elliot Erbett, as well as the Alex Soss of this world. So I think there's a process of learning through doing, but then I think if you really then evolve into a more serious engagement around collecting, that's really when you need to start seeking out experts, because you're probably refining your taste and your hunt, and you need the help of others to really source the work. And, I think that's when galleries and auction houses and places like that become extremely important.
Yeah, I definitely agree with all of that. There's a lot of doors for introduction that are open to people that, don't make it the hardest thing to do and the biggest financial commitment as well, to kind of start that exploration down the road of collecting. And I actually think Magnum's a nice way to do it. I like those. I've always enjoyed that small print sale. It's just fun and a nice way to get started. And then from there, like as Sophie said, you can just kind of move on. And then I think when you're thinking of it as a larger purchase for yourself, because people are thinking about money sometimes, then it's time, I think, to start talking to someone who really is familiar with what you're interested in doing and what you want to do, and the work itself and the artists and how they're presenting their work and how that's happening.
Yeah, because it is, I think, for a lot of people, it's quite a financial investment. Like, I think collecting art is a lot different than collecting teapots or pens or records or something else. Like, in general, there's a much higher level for entry. But why do you think perhaps that, aside from the financial hurdle, why do we think about collecting art and photography differently than how we would think about collecting music and CDs?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think that they bring joy, don't they? And just like music and CDs in a way, it's just a different sort of medium. Again, I think there's a certain amount of compulsion about both, frankly. I mean, you've seen sort of vinyl collections go completely bananas. I think, just like that, people that begin as kind of, photography is so rich. The history of photography is so rich. It's a communication medium in an artistic form. It's so broad and wonderful as a medium. And there's so much that it says about culture and society. And, it's a technology as well as an art form. I think you can manage it within your own sort of parameters. It's not like I used to go to, when I was back in London, I used to go to Photo London. I sort of told myself I had a certain budget of, I think I had 1,000 at that time. It was a while ago now, but I could get some quite interesting things with that. And I just go, okay, so I've never really thought of myself as a collector. I'm someone that works in photography and has happened upon, I have quite a few prints on my wall now through the work that I've done over the years. But there was a moment pre-kids where I was like, okay, I can afford to go with like it to Photo London, and I'm going to do this because I want to commit to supporting this ecosystem. And I bought an Iraqi Polaroid from Michael Hoppen for £500. I got a 19th century photographer from Bob Hershkowitz for £1,000. And a really diverse mix of things, actually. So I think maybe the price point has gone up a bit these days, but it's still possible to actually, particularly if you're talking to the gallerists, like to find things that are within your budget as a emerging collector. I think it's about getting over that hurdle of like, most gallerists just want to have, like, they're thrilled to have, younger and new collectors kind of coming into the mix. So, you should never be intimidated in talking to them. They want that conversation, that interaction. And I think through that conversation, you can find a lot more out about what they have, maybe not even on the walls of their gallery, but in their store or the cupboard in the fair that they've got some of their goodies in, and really take the opportunity to kind of learn.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I look at, if you want to learn the history of the world for the past, 200 years, just read about the history of photography. I feel like it's all interwoven together, and that's one of the beautiful things about it. And for me, collecting photography, just specifically not as someone who is selling it, but my own collecting is, I feel like everything that I have is something that just creates an emotional response for me. And that's what's so lovely about it. It's visual. It's there for you to take in. I look at everything on my walls and I just have a different feeling for each piece. And it really moves me. And I think that's one of the best things about photography, is that you can find something that creates that response in a multitude of ways, and that suits you. And it can be a complete abstraction. It can be something that's extremely historical. It can be something, right in the middle, a beautiful landscape that invokes a memory of your childhood. I mean, there's so many avenues of photography, and there's so much out there that is varied for everyone. You can find what you love and what creates that response for you. And then again, going out and finding it and finding someone to help you acquire that in your price point. I think it's possible at almost any price point. That's part of it, is that it is different than collecting other things. It might be more expensive than a teapot, but I'm sure there's some extremely expensive teapots out there. I can only imagine. But, this is something that you're not keeping in a cabinet for the most part. A lot of people who are collecting are hanging their work. They're having it around them. They're looking at it. They're enjoying it. They're getting that response from it when they see it. And I think that is kind of part of the overall bit of collecting. And then, as Sophie said, going to the fairs, any art fair, I think is an exceptional way to learn about collecting and about the history of photography, because I'll just use AIPAD as an example, and Periphoto, and, any other fair. You can see the very beginnings of the history of photography all the way through to things that were made months ago. I mean, you get everything in there in one room, where you can walk around and really discover what has happened and what's happening now. And I think that that's kind of incredible that you can do that in one room. And maybe you need a day, maybe you need two, but you can go through and you can find things like, for $1,000. Of course, there are things that are much more expensive, but you can really find things. And I think the biggest part of that is finding something that you like and not being intimidated to ask about it. And I think all the dealers that are working, all the gallerists, they want you to come in and talk to them. I love it when people come talk to me. I don't expect anyone to pull out a checkbook as much as I just want them to understand what they're seeing and explore it.
This episode of Subtext Discourse is brought to you by AIPAD and the Photography Show. AIPAD represents fine art photography galleries around the world and is proud to present the 2025 edition of its flagship event, the Photography Show. The fair will showcase photography from the earliest processes to cutting-edge contemporary work that pushes the boundaries of the medium. From April 23rd until 27th at the Park Avenue Armory in New York City, go to www.apad.com/show for more information and to plan your visit. Well, I think it's probably fair to say that you both have got over the hurdle of collecting and you're comfortable asking about prints and looking at images, and you have kind of assurance in how you feel about it if an image is right for you. But when I watched the Fotografiska AIPAD talk about emerging photography, and when I've been to talking galleries and I've listened to other collectors talk about their collecting journey, you often hear about collectors saying, oh, this was a good choice, this was a bad choice, I shouldn't have bought this, or this was a mistake. And I can imagine as a new collector, that's a bit anxiety inducing, because you want to start collecting, you want to get involved, but you also don't want to do the wrong thing and make a mistake. Can you make a mistake? Like, what's a bad choice when it comes to collecting?
Of course. I mean, I think you learn through mistakes, don't you? It's part of the journey. I mean, I certainly liked when I had that moment of buying prints from fairs. Fairs, you can see the object, you can have the conversation with the expert and the gallerist, and you're seeing it in real life. I think obviously the online space for new collectors is a bit more of a minefield, because you can be sourcing things from all kinds of different contexts. And that way, you're not seeing the object, you're seeing a representation of the object. And, it might not be as clear what you're buying, even if it's from a very reputable platform. And so I think in that context, sometimes you can make mistakes because you've spied something, bought it, and it doesn't end up. I mean, we've had that, all kinds of online purchases end up like that. It's not just photographs. But there's also the medium itself, I think, and the fact that it is, I mean, a more sort of obvious example is like pictures where the fixing goes or something like that,
Yes.
The medium itself can also kind of not be fully where it needs to be when you're buying a print. I've got a print that's definitely the fixing's gone on it. And these kind of things can happen that aren't maybe perhaps so obvious when you purchase something, but can then end up happening over time. So there's different ways that things emerge, let's put it that way, whether they're immediate when you receive it from an online purchase or through the medium itself just not being fixed. Or the backing of it being backed onto something that's not archival, or, there's loads of things like that we all encounter with photography.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think mistakes can be made, and I think the best thing, and I find more and more things, I don't know if I would necessarily call it a complete mistake, but I do find, as Sophie said, the online purchasing is in some ways an open door for things to not be completely great and to go wrong at times. So I do think if you are purchasing online, I'm not discouraging it, but I think that you need to make sure you get as much information as possible before you purchase from an online source. If I was asking someone online for information, I would ask for photographs of the front and the back. I would ask for a complete condition report. You really want to get as much information as possible, because all you're seeing is an image on a screen. You're not seeing, as I said, the object itself. So you want to get as much information about that object, so you're not, steered wrong with fixing going wrong, or things coming off of their mounts, or staining, or a lot of condition issues. And I think condition is a big part of things where, oh, I bought this, how'd I do? People ask me that. I bought this online, how'd I do? Well, okay, that's a tough question. One, you love the image, so you did great because you got this image because you love it, and that's I think the very key point of collecting. Do you love it? Do you love it? Does it make you feel wonderful? Do you want to look at it every day in your home? That's the first question. Do you love it? And then the next question is, well, how's the condition? How's it look? What's going on with this print? And I think, when the risk taking is not having someone to guide you to say, this is a great print. And there are also times when there isn't a great print. And that's the only thing you can get, is this print that might have some issues, but that's what you can get. And I think that's important to understand too, is that not every photograph is in the best shape, and you can't sometimes find the photograph that you want and the image that you want that's in the greatest condition. Sometimes you have to accept a few things that are not perfect because you want this amazing photograph. But I do think mistakes can be made, especially with online buying. And I think the biggest thing is to ask as many questions as possible and get as many images of the photograph as possible.
Yeah. So you wouldn't consider mistakes to be like buying the wrong thing because you fell out of love with it, or it was an impulse buy?
It also happens. I mean, we change as people, don't we? So your emotional response to a picture at one point in your life could change completely, which is why there's a thriving secondary market. I mean, I think that's just natural, and I think ultimately you have to go with your gut and, an informed gut choice, because you are drawn emotionally to pictures. I think there is something, and I think particularly when collectors are starting out, they can accumulate quite a lot of work without really having a clear idea about why, but they're just drawn to it. And I think what naturally happens with quite a lot of serious collectors is they then refine their taste and they hone down on a subject matter or an area of interest. And so they then generally tend to put the earlier stuff into the market again because they've decided this is the area that they want to be kind of known for, actually. And in many cases in the US, they're thinking about legacy as well. So they're refining and kind of clarifying a collection that may then be gifted into an institutional collection or something like that. So I think that's a natural evolution of the sort of collecting process.
I totally agree. I don't think there's necessarily an image mistake. If it's something that you're finding that you love it, and you take it, and then later on, tastes change, as Sophie said. And again, there's always someone, or hopefully there's someone else who would want that. So it goes back out there for that person who's ready for that to be part of their life now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think when most people start collecting or start buying photographs, they're not necessarily thinking about, I'm going to gift this to the whatever foundation in 50 years' time. So it's probably a good idea to not overthink it, isn't it?
I think it's good to not overthink. And, again, I think when you're starting, there are a lot of people who are just looking for a few things to have in their life. And then there are those people who get more passionate and decide to keep building. And that is where the refinement comes in of the collection and what they're trying to do. And if they start to have an idea and a theme in mind. And I mean, there have been amazing collections built on themes throughout the past, 50 years. And those, I think, get built over time, and things weave in and out of those collections to help kind of create the whole. And it is quite lovely when people build these amazing collections and they do go to institutions. I think that's kind of a beautiful way to look at it, because I think in terms of buying and collecting, you are a keeper of this photograph. You are this legacy idea. You're keeping it for future generations, and then it's being passed on for other people. So you're kind of taking your moment with it, and then later on, someone else will be able to take their moment with it. And when they build those collections to go to museums, then the general public gets to take a moment with them as well. So it's a nice kind of way to pass on your legacy. I agree.
Do you think people should be concerned about investment potential of anything that they buy as an artwork? Because that often comes up with certain financial institutes offering guarantees against artwork, and during the NFT era, you could buy tokens of very expensive artworks. Like, how realistic is it really when you're buying a work for $1,000 that it's going to accrue in value?
It's totally not. Yeah, I would never tell anyone to say, this is an investment. This is going to increase in value. There's no guarantees, and there's no guarantees about the art market. That's why I think you should buy things that are in good shape. You should buy things that you love, because you might still have them. And later on, if the market might go down, and you're still going to have them. So buying to say, I'm only buying this for an investment, I'm going to keep it and sell it later, it's a huge risk. I don't think it's the way to collect. I just don't think you should collect in that way, because you just don't know what's going to happen with the market. There are some markets that are always probably going to be strong, but you just don't know. And I think it's much more important to buy for what you're going to enjoy.
Yeah, it's a fun additional element to the process, just like some people get really into the hunt itself, and the finding of the work. It's one of the aspects of collecting that some people are drawn to, but it shouldn't be the main driver, because, you're living with this work. It's part of your life. And I think it's got to be much more of an emotional engagement with the material versus a purely financial kind of driven decision. That's got to be a part of it in terms of what you can afford to buy, but you should never think about buying to then, particularly as an emerging collector, it's not really what you should be driven by.
You both mentioned the kind of emotional response to an image. Like, what do you think some things are that new collectors that haven't maybe found their, I don't know if you say you found your voice, if you haven't found your visual style yet, or you know what you're drawn to, like what are some things you can listen out for feeling wise? If you're going to a fair, for example.
I mean, it's so individual. I mean, I think sometimes understanding the stories of behind the pictures are also very interesting. So it's sort of, I mean, for me, obviously with my background in documentary photography, I've been drawn to lots of people-based images. But I mean, it's kind of hard to really strictly define what draws you to a picture. I think you learn through time, and it can be about as simple as the palette or the paper or the combination of all the factors kind of playing together, just like any art, or visual sort of. It's sort of it's sometimes hard to put your finger on, and I don't think you should. Again, I don't think one should overthink it. I think it, when you know.
Yeah, I agree. I have an 8-year-old, and every time I hang a new show at the gallery, I bring her in and I just ask her to look around and however long she wants and tell me what her favorite thing is. And in terms of, collecting, I think approaching it from that kind of child perspective in a way is nice because you're walking into a room and just see what makes you feel great and what you like and just kind of approaching it like that. And then you can delve into why you like it and what's doing that for you. But I like the idea of just saying, well, just what's your favorite? What's your favorite in this room? And then let's talk about why. And everyone's response is going to be different, I think, and for the most part. And everyone's going to choose something for a different reason because I do think it comes back to our own emotional connection, our histories, our backgrounds, and visually what we love, what we enjoy seeing. So I think everyone's different. And I think being able to just come in and say, oh, well, what's your favorite right now? And then kind of go further with it is a nice approach to it.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. Like just seeing how you feel about something rather than looking for external validation, somebody saying this is good. If you resonate with an image, you're like, there's something in there. I might not be able to put it into words, but something is drawing me to that. And then if you're speaking with the artist or you're speaking with the dealer, maybe the new information will make you like it more. Maybe it will turn you away from it, but at least then you're opening the dialogue, aren't you, with the work?
And I agree with Sophie. I've definitely learned to love things more because I've learned more about the artist or the context of the work. That always seems to kind of motivate me in one direction or another with different pieces and for the reason why. So I think that does add to it. But I think as the initial you want that initial reaction, and then you go into what else is there, and it might expand for you, or you might also say, oh wait, you know what? It's not for me. I realize that now. Learning a little bit more about everything the photographer is doing or the art itself. So
for new collectors, do you have a recommendation if emerging or established artist is the best way to get involved?
Well, I think the reality is established artists are going to be more expensive in most cases. Although, I mean, again, I talked about the fact that I, with my fairly meager budget, was able to buy a Polaroid by Iraqi in a 19th century. I mean, I'm still amazed at how 19th century is actually still wildly affordable compared to contemporary photography in some cases. The market is not always sensible when it comes to the pricing of things in some ways.
Yeah.
In that a really big 20th century name is going to be way more expensive because of their exposure to the market than a 19th century vintage. And I think that's one of the things that's kind of fascinating actually. But there's different scale can play into price, and I think that's something that's interesting. And we were just talking about the square print sale, for example, the Magnum square print sale, where you can, obviously these are digital prints, so that also means that they're not silver gelatin. They're not the type of photographic printing can also make maybe a work by or you can buy. We talked about the fact that our Collecting for Everyone discussion started with photo books. I mean, I think we need to bring that back into the mix as
Yes.
well. You know, the photo book can be a way to start to really learn, but also to buy work by, you know, really established photographers that you might not be able to buy the actual print of, but it's a way to learn and to cherish that work. And that can build into its own obsession. But I think the book is a hugely important part of the sort of photographic journey, really, for everyone, because it's the means that a lot of photographers, particularly when they're authoring the books, are actually showing you how they want their work to be read and understood and journeyed through. So I think that there's lots of ways as someone with a limited budget that you can kind of really start understanding and engaging with a particular artist or photographer's work.
I also love photo books, and I think they're a great way to get into collecting. And I mean, and there's different levels, of course. You can get just a photo book for an affordable price. There are also limited edition photo books that come with prints that are beautiful. And so that gives another open door for you to get a print and a book and to be able to really learn more about the artist. I think photographers and artists are very invested in the way that their books come out and their layout, and they're doing it for a reason. So you can kind of get into their mindset a little bit about what they've done with their, you know, when they work with their designers and how they have structured the book and the writing in the book about their artwork, which I think all of that's kind of a really nice way to get involved in it. And I do think that this, you know, having a very digital world is helpful. You can look up so much and learn so much online while you're starting to think about things. And then again, I think you have to kind of go into it and start talking to people who know and who can just guide you in the right direction. But I think there's definitely a way to kind of start off in a slower way and less financial commitment where you can still collect photography. I think photography is one of the markets where you can really still not spend a huge amount of money and get beautiful things.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's worth reiterating about the photo books because I think it's a very good low stakes way of getting involved with photography and building a collection or starting your collection, but also supporting the artists. You can drop like 50 or 100 euros, dollars, pounds on an artist book. It's not going to break the bank, and that's part of then the foundation of what you go on to afterwards. I guess we're coming up to the end. I've noticed on the AIPAD website, so for people that want to go much deeper than what we've really only just scratched the surface, but for people that do want to go deeper, the AIPAD On Collecting Photography Guide is on the website, and I think that's a really great resource and a good starting point. There's the Fotografiska AIPAD Talks, which we already mentioned. Those are on YouTube. And Andrew, you have this straight talk on collecting photography from Scheinbaum and Rusek, also on your YouTube. Did you want to say a few things about that?
Sure. During the pandemic, we didn't know what to do with ourselves, and we weren't seeing many people. So we just thought, well, and I'll just say this, let me just preface it. Our gallery is, as I said, the foundation of our gallery is education. So the gallery was founded by my parents, David Scheinbaum and Janet Rusek, thus Scheinbaum and Rusek. And David taught the history of photography and photography at the College of Santa Fe here in New Mexico for 40 years. So he is at the core an educator along with everything else. So what we decided to do was start talking about collecting photography on YouTube because we wanted to educate people and talk to people. So we started doing newsletters, and then with kind of slideshows and things of that nature, and then we finally decided to try to film it, which I will say the first one, please ignore the film quality because I am behind the camera, I'm editing everything, and I hadn't learned quite yet. But the content, which is most important, is great. And we did a whole series on collecting photography, and we actually did 2 videos on the photo book itself because we think it's so important. But we really just delve into kind of just the questions that most people ask us. You know, what's the difference between a vintage print and a non-vintage print? Why would we collect one versus the other? Why are they priced differently? You know, it's a lot of this stuff that we've talked about already. You know, why would I buy should I buy a bigger one or a smaller one? And what's the difference? And so we just kind of go into all of those questions that we've had throughout the years, and we've turned them into a series of videos. It's been a lot of fun. We actually have to make a new video soon. We haven't done it in a while, and we're waiting for the right time. But it's been really enjoyable. And then in terms of the AIPAD on Collecting photography guide, I think that's an incredible resource for people. It goes into so much. It was put together by a group of AIPAD dealers a long time ago and then revisited and edited again. It's pretty up to date. I think at this point it might be missing something about NFTs, but that's I think we missed that section, and they hadn't arrived yet when it was written, but it's on the website. It's really great to take a look through if you have a chance. I would recommend it. It gives a lot of pointers. It also kind of goes into all the terminology that we're talking about here. It gives definitions so you can understand more about things that maybe are unclear to you. So I would highly recommend taking a peek.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. So we're recording this on the 18th of March, and this episode will be published on the 22nd of April, which is one day before the fair opens. So for anxious first-time visitors who are going to start their collecting journey tomorrow, how can they best prepare?
I would say just come to the fair and start walking around, and don't be afraid to talk to people. You know, there's booths, as I said, from every kind of genre of photography, every time frame, and ask questions. Please ask questions. Do not feel as though you can't ask a question because you're not buying something from that person. Take a look at the On Collecting guide. If you have a moment or two, watch one of the videos of the talks that we've had done, the Fotografiska talks. But I think just coming is the best thing that you can do. Just come to the fair.
And be patient. You know, it's not like, don't try not to be anxious, be patient, and just see it as a process. You know, you may not find the print you want on that day. It's really a process of discovery, and it's the journey that's as interesting as anything else. So it's a really rich environment to kind of educate yourself in. And I would really focus on that first. And through that process, you may find something you like. But I think it's better to come with an open mind and sort of explore than to force anything. And I think these things always happen when you least expect them. You chance upon the picture that you want, but it's by being open-minded and kind of and enjoying yourself. It's a wonderful, opportunity to see a lot of photography in one room.
And I'll also just kind of plug other sections, because we do have a photo publisher section as well. So if you're interested in the photo book, there's going to be a lot of publishers there. Aperture will be there. There's going to be, some small publishers, some bigger publishers, and you can really start to explore just by going back there and looking at the books and taking your time with them. We also have a great talk series that will be in person at the fair. So if you want to explore more about some specific topics and artists, those will be put up on the AIPAD website as soon as they're all kind of set and sorted. And I highly recommend going to some of the talks as well, just to hear what people have to say. We will have a talk on collecting with some collectors. We're going to have some various artists. We're at all sorts of themes. And I think going to the talks is another great way to kind of just open up another page for you to explore.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it was lovely speaking to you both, Andra and Sophie. Thank you very much for your time and your insights and your wisdom. And I hope that people listening learnt a few things about collecting photography and feel a bit more confident on their on their journey forward.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us and having me. I really appreciate it. It's been quite nice.
It was great speaking with Andra and Sophie about their own photo collecting journeys and their advice for photo collecting curious to get started collecting photography. Links to the various resources and guides are included in the show notes, together with details of the Association of International Photography Art Dealers. This was the final episode in the collaborative series with AIPAD, talking all things AIPAD, the history of the organisation, how much photography has changed since those early days in the 1970s, and what we can expect to see going forward. I really appreciated everyone sharing their knowledge and insights over the past 7 episodes, particularly that we can include different generations as well as gender and international points of view. Something I'll certainly take away from this is the importance of the photographic object. The physical nature of photographs, I'm pretty sure, was brought up in every conversation, and it's something that's often overlooked when it comes to contemporary photography. If you don't want to miss out on new episodes of the podcast, please subscribe to Subtext Discourse Art World podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And if you know someone else interested in the overlap of photography and the art world, please send them a link to the show. Podcasting is obviously a broadcast medium, however I'm happy for listeners to reach out. You're welcome to follow me on Threads, Instagram, Blue Sky and LinkedIn at Michael Dooney. Otherwise, you can also go to my website, www.michaeldooney.net. There you'll also find the International Photo Festival database I've put together, as well as my webinar for photographers and artists working in lens-based media to better understand the art market and to get their work into galleries. That's all for now. Thanks again for tuning in. My name's Michael Dooney, and you've been listening to Subtext and Discourse.